Chapter 15 of Mystery at Number 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elliot Miller. The Mystery at Number 6 by Augusta Hewell Seaman. Chapter 15. Jerry Sawgrass is Cornered. Bernice saw her at the same time and poked Sidney violently in the back to attract his attention. "I see. Wait a moment. We must think how it's best to approach her," he whispered. After a conference with Mr. Treadwell, it was decided that Bernice herself had better get out of the car and speak to the woman and invite her to go on to Arcadia in Mr. Treadwell's own conveyance. "Mustn't alarm her," warned Mr. Treadwell. "Must have her think we have come this way and stumbled on the accident quite by chance. That we're surprised to find her here and only too delighted to be of service to her. She'd better sit beside me here in the front of the car and let Sidney go in the back till we reach Arcadia." Bernice was a little shy about accepting the mission, but Sidney helped her out of the car, explaining to Mrs. Conan at the same time that they had just seen someone they knew among the passengers and were going to offer to help her out. "Why, how do you do?" cried Bernice, approaching the woman, who had been looking the other way and holding out her hand. "How unfortunate this accident was. I hope you weren't hurt." The woman gazed at her a moment without recognizing her. Then her face broadened in a grin of recognition, and she cried, "Hey!" "Can't we help you out?" went on Bernice. "We're going on in this direction in Mr. Treadwell's car, and we'll gladly put you down wherever you want to go." Jerry's wife gazed at her uncomprehendingly a moment, and then the situation seemed to dawn upon her. "Well, thank ye. I was set to go to Arcadia when that there bus went over. I'm that shook up. I had to crawl out the back on my hands and knees. I reckon there's no telling where the other bus'll come along, and I gotta catch the one from Arcadia to Punta Gorda. Sure, I'll be right glad to go on with y'all." She got heavily to her feet and followed Bernice back to the car. When she had reached it, Sidney shook hands with her cordially and introduced her to the other occupants of the car. Then he helped her in beside Mr. Treadwell. Quite overwhelmed by this unwonted hospitality, she beamed impartially upon them all, while Sidney, leaning forward from the rear seat, plied her with polite questions. "Well, how's everything out at Number 6 since we saw you last?" he inquired heartily. A perceptible change came over her face as she replied cautiously, "Pretty well, I reckon. We don't live thar no more." "Oh, so you moved. Hope you found as pleasant a place for your new home. Suppose you left the others thar?" As her only acknowledgment of this question was a determined and ominous silence, Sidney hastened to change the subject and asked her how the accident to the bus happened. This drew from her a voluble account and occupied the rest of the time till they drew up the bus stand in Arcadia. When Sidney had helped her out, she bade them all a friendly goodbye and thanked everybody impartially for the kindness in transporting her to the destination so quickly. Then she disappeared into a nearby confectionery store, where she indicated she would sit and wait for the next bus. Sidney and Bernice gazed at each other in rather a panic, thinking this a dreadful anticlimax to all their hopes and the exciting chase. But Mr. Treadwell, finding himself conveniently out of tobacco, remarked that he'd better get out and stock up at this place where they seemed to have a supply, as there was no telling when he might be able to find more, and of the right kind, in the course of their journey. Accordingly, he too left the car and disappeared into the shop. He was gone a very long time. So long it was that Mrs. Conant became quite uneasy and suggested that Sidney go and hunt him up. But the two young people, realizing only too well his mission and loath to interfere with it in any way, disclaimed any uneasiness about him, and tried to divert her by giving her a conservative account of how it happened that they'd been acquainted with Jerry's wife. Presently Mr. Treadwell came out. He excused himself for the long delay by saying he had met someone he knew in the store who kept him talking overtime. But there was a distinctly satisfied gleam in his eye, and the two cousins felt rather certain that his unacknowledged mission had been successful. To the great astonishment of everyone, however, He turned round to those on the rear seat and proposed a surprising change of plans. "I find on inquiry that someone I have been wanting to see on the matter of business is in this vicinity, and that therefore it would be wise to put up in this town for the night, instead of going on as far as Punta Gorda or Fort Myers as we planned. There's a fair hotel here, I believe. Would it disappoint you folks very much to remain over?" Mrs. Conan comfortably expressed herself as delighted to remain, for the region was all new and interesting to her, and the two cousins were naturally nothing loath, scenting, as they did, some still undisclosed development. While they were preparing to depart in search of their hotel, the Fort Myers bus arrived and left, carrying with it the Cracker woman, who waved farewell to them cordially. Both, however, thought they saw a look of understanding pass between her and Mr. Tredwell before the bus rolled away. It was not till that night after supper, when Mrs. Conan had retired early with a headache and Mr. Tredwell had proposed to them a stroll about the moonlit town, that they learned the true inwardness of his long absence in the store that afternoon. "Of course you are wild to hear the result of my interview with our Cracker friend," began Mr. Tredwell, "so I won't keep you in suspense another moment. After I had bought my cigars, I walked over to where Mrs. Jerry was sitting by a small table, the only one there happened to be in the place, and asked her if she was not rather thirsty and tired after her unfortunate experience, and would she allow me to order her some soda or ice cream. Said I was going to have a glass of ginger ale myself. She accepted with some slight show of reluctance. I think she rather suspected by then I had something up my sleeve, so to speak. However, I talked about impersonal subjects till she was well along with her dish of ice cream. Then suddenly I looked her right in the eye and quietly demanded, 'Why did you leave Jerry and the child, Mrs. Simpson, and where are they now?' The unexpectedness of the attack took her completely off her guard. 'I ain't left them. I'm going back. That is, I mean—' She floundered and corrected herself and grew red and looked down to avoid meeting my eye. Then, 'You ain't got no right to ask me questions anyhow,' she flared out. 'I've got the best right in the world, Mrs. Simpson,' I answered her quietly, 'and it would pay you to tell me at once and truthfully just where you left the other two.' With this, I very unobtrusively laid several $10 bills on the table, and put my hand over them. I strongly suspected she had a mercenary streak, and I wasn't mistaken, although I'll say this for her. She isn't wholly mercenary, however. The sight of the money aroused her avarice, but she was still loyal to Jerry. 'He ain't done nothing wrong,' she said defiantly, eyeing the bills all the time. 'I don't know what you want him for, but he ain't done nothing wrong, and I ain't going to give way on him.' 'Madam,' I replied, 'you mistake me, I'm afraid. I hadn't anything against Mr. Simpson. I don't want to get him into any trouble. I don't know anything about him, in fact. I only want to have a talk with him about this child, this young girl, Dell as you call her. There are some legal reasons why I must know who she is and how she came to be in his care.' I thought it wise to be perfectly frank with her, and in the end it proved the best line to have taken. She suddenly collapsed in her chair and looked at me with a hunted expression. 'There it is,' she gasped. 'It meets me at every turn. That Dell's the cause of all his troubles, and his queerness too. It's on account of her he's run away. He told me that much, though he won't tell me no more. I ain't got nothing agin the child. She's a nice enough little thing, but she certainly do make him queer. If he wasn't that sick he can't move hand nor foot, we'd be down in the glades this minute, all on account of her.' 'Oh, then he's ill!' I exclaimed. 'That certainly is too bad.' 'Yes, he's that sick he had to lay up at a little shack down between here and Punta Gorda,' she rambled on, rather forgetting for the moment, I imagine, that I was to be considered in the light of an enemy. Truth to tell, I think she was glad to have someone to talk to and pour out her grievances to. 'I've been up to Barrow a day trying to get him the medicine he wanted. They didn't have it at Arcadia. He don't know I went so far. He'll be wondering, but I got the stuff.' I suddenly decided to parley no longer with her, but come to a decided point, so I said, 'Look here, Miss Simpson, we might as well as understand each other. The money is yours, providing you'll give me the information I want. It isn't a bribe, it's just honest pay for honest assistance. There'll be more for you later when we've settled matters satisfactorily. I mean no harm to Jerry.